One week before I was supposed to leave for college, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the money was gone. Not gone in the way money goes when a family hits an unexpected hardship, a medical emergency or a sudden job loss or something that arrives without warning and leaves everyone scrambling to adjust. Gone in the deliberate, considered, quietly executed way that only happens when someone makes a decision about your life and chooses not to tell you until the last possible moment, when there is nothing left to do about it except absorb it and figure out what comes next entirely on your own. My college fund, 12 years of birthday money and Christmas money and the small careful contributions my grandparents had made every single year since the day I was born, had been redirected. That was the word my father used when he told me. Redirected. He said it the way people choose words when they have thought carefully about which ones sound least like what they actually are, when the truth of a thing is too uncomfortable to say plainly and so a softer word is placed in front of it like a screen. The money had been given to my sister for her wedding. My sister Dana was 26 that year. She had been engaged for 8 months to a man named Patrick who wore expensive watches and had a confident, easy manner that most people in my family found charming and that I had always found slightly hollow, the kind of charm that exists in the space where genuine curiosity about other people should be. Patrick had never, in the 2 years I had known him, asked me a single question about my own life, my studies, my plans, anything. He was entirely comfortable receiving attention and entirely uninterested in giving it, which made him, in retrospect, a perfectly natural match for the dynamic my family had always operated under. The wedding was going to be large. The venue Dana had chosen cost more than my entire college fund on its own. She had wanted something specific, the kind of wedding that requires significant money and significant planning and a father who finds it very difficult to say no to his eldest daughter about anything that will make her smile at him the way she smiled when she was getting what she wanted. My father was that father. He had always been that father. And the way he had found to give Dana what she wanted this particular time was my education. My name is Rachel Morgan. I am 31 years old. I am a corporate lawyer at a firm where I made partner 2 years ago, which is faster than almost anyone in the history of that firm has ever done it. I mention that not to impress you but because it is directly and specifically relevant to what this story is actually about and what it cost to get here. I put myself through college and through law school without a single dollar from my father. I worked 3 jobs during my undergraduate years, sometimes 4 during exam periods when the scholarship requirements demanded I maintain a grade point average that left no room for anything less than complete dedication. I won a full academic scholarship to one of the top law schools in the country that covered tuition, housing, and enough of my living expenses that I only needed 2 jobs instead of 3 during those 3 years. I did not do any of that to prove something to my father. I want to be clear about that because I think it would be easy to frame this story as being about revenge from the very beginning, and it was not. I did it because I had no other choice and because the alternative was giving up on the only future I had ever been able to clearly picture for myself. But somewhere along the way, in the spaces between the early morning shifts and the late-night study sessions and the semesters that blurred together into a single long exhausted determined push forward, proving something happened anyway. Quietly. As a side effect of simply surviving. This is the story of the envelope I sent my father 10 years after that kitchen table conversation, and what happened in the days and weeks after he opened it. But before the envelope I need to tell you about Dana and about my father and about the particular architecture of how our family had always worked, because none of what came later makes sense without understanding the foundation it was built on. The family dynamic. My father raised Dana and me largely alone after my mother passed away when I was 9 years old and Dana was 14. I do not say this to build sympathy for him because sympathy in this particular story becomes complicated very quickly and I am not interested in softening what happened with context that could be used to excuse it. I say it because it is simply true, and because the truth of it shaped everything that followed in ways I spent years trying to understand. My mother had been the one who kept things balanced in our family. Not dramatically, not in the way that makes itself visible and gets praised and noticed. She did it quietly, the way certain people maintain equilibrium in a room without anyone understanding that the equilibrium is a choice and a daily effort rather than something that simply exists. She noticed when one child was receiving more than the other and she adjusted, gently, without making it a conversation or a lesson, because she understood that children do not need to be taught they are loved equally, they need to feel it without being told to feel it. When she was gone, that balancing stopped. It stopped completely and immediately, in the way that things maintained by one person stop the moment that person is no longer there to maintain them, and nobody noticed it stopping for a long time because nobody had fully understood, until she was absent, how much of the equilibrium had been her specific doing. Dana became, in the years after my mother died, the emotional center of my father's world. Not because she consciously engineered it, or at least I do not believe she did, but because grief reshapes the way parents see their children in ways that are powerful and largely invisible to the person doing the seeing. My father, in his grief, found himself drawn to the child who reminded him most of my mother. That child was Dana, who had my mother's eyes and her way of laughing and her particular ease in a room full of people, the kind of ease that makes everyone feel slightly warmer simply by being near it. I was the child who reminded him of himself. Quieter. More internal. Prone to working through hard things alone rather than bringing them into the open where they could be shared and processed. That was, I think, a less comfortable thing for a grieving man to be reminded of, and so I was the child he loved in the way that some fathers love children they do not quite know how to reach, at a slight distance, with a kind of pride that occasionally expressed itself but never quite learned to sit close. By the time I was 17, I had spent 8 years learning not to need very much from my father, because needing things from him was an exercise in quiet repeated disappointment that I had gradually, without deciding to, stop subjecting myself to. I focused on school because school was the one place where effort produced results in a way that felt reliable and fair. I kept my grades near perfect because a near perfect grade point average responded to work in a way that people did not always respond to it. I found, in academic achievement, a kind of control over outcomes that my home life had never offered me. I knew the college fund existed because my grandparents, my mother's parents, had told me about it directly when I was 15. They had made a point of sitting me down and explaining it clearly, made sure I understood it was mine, built specifically for my education, contributed to over 12 years because they believed in what I was going to do with my life. I had held on to that knowledge for 2 years like something solid in a house that did not always feel solid. I had planned my entire future around it. When my father sat me down at the kitchen table one week before I was supposed to leave and told me it had been redirected, I looked at his face and I understood two things at the same time. The first was that he was not going to apologize in any way that would actually mean something. The second was that if I fell apart in that kitchen, if I cried or screamed or begged him to fix it, I would spend the next several years of my life waiting for a rescue that was never going to arrive. So I did not fall apart. I asked him one question. I asked him whether he had told my grandparents what he had done with the money they had spent 12 years contributing, since it had been their generosity as much as his that had built that fund. He did not answer. The look on his face answered for him, which was that he had not told them, and that he had been quietly hoping I would not think to ask. I stood up. I told him I would figure it out. I used those exact words because they were the truest thing available to me in that moment, and because I wanted him to hear them and sit with what they meant, which was that I was going to handle this myself and that I was going to remember, for the rest of my life, that I had to. I went to my room. I opened my laptop. And I started looking for another way. The scholarship I found was not the first one I applied for. I want to be honest about that because I think there is a version of this story where the discovery happens immediately, where the door opens the moment you need it to, where the universe responds to injustice with swift and satisfying correction. That is not what happened. What happened was 3 weeks of sitting at my desk after school and on weekends and in the early hours before my alarm went off, searching databases and financial aid websites and obscure foundation listings that most people in my position did not know existed because nobody had ever sat them down and taught them how to look. My father did not help me look. Dana did not ask how the search was going. The house continued around me the way it always had, with Dana at the center of it, wedding planning spreading across the kitchen table where my future had been quietly taken from me, fabric swatches and venue brochures and the particular excited noise that surrounds a celebration being built in real time. I moved through that house during those 3 weeks like a person in a parallel universe, occupying the same physical space as everyone else while living inside a completely different reality. I applied for 11 scholarships in those 3 weeks. I was rejected from 4 before I heard back from the one that changed everything. It was a merit-based scholarship offered by a private foundation that supported first-generation college students pursuing degrees in law, public policy, or related fields. The application required 3 essays, 2 letters of recommendation, a personal statement, and an interview conducted by a panel of foundation board members. I wrote the essays over 6 consecutive evenings after dinner. I asked 2 teachers who knew my work well for the recommendation letters. I wrote the personal statement in one long sitting on a Saturday morning and then rewrote it 4 times over the following week until every sentence said exactly what I meant it to say. The interview was conducted by video call on a Thursday afternoon in August, 2 weeks before the semester was scheduled to begin. There were 4 people on the panel. They asked me difficult questions, the kind designed to understand not just how well you think but how you think under pressure, how you handle uncertainty, how clearly you can articulate what you want and why you want it. I had prepared for weeks, but the preparation that mattered most was not the practice answers I had rehearsed. It was the simple fact that I genuinely understood why I wanted what I was asking for, in a way that does not require rehearsal because it comes from something real. I received the offer letter 10 days later. Full tuition coverage for 4 years, a housing stipend, and a renewable annual grant for living expenses tied to maintaining a grade point average that I had no intention of letting slip. I sat in my room and read the letter 3 times before I allowed myself to believe it. I did not tell my father that night. I told my grandparents first, because they had been the ones to build that fund in the first place and because they deserved to know before anyone else that their investment in me, even though it had been taken from me in one form, had somehow still found its way to what it was always meant to do. My grandmother cried on the phone. My grandfather asked me to read him the letter out loud, all of it, slowly. I told my father the next morning at breakfast. He said he was proud of me. He said it warmly and I believe he meant it, in the particular way people mean things when the outcome has resolved itself in a way that relieves them of having to face the consequences of their own decisions. I did not say anything about that. I thanked him and I finished my coffee and I started packing. College and what came after. I will not pretend that the 4 years of college were easy, because they were not, and pretending otherwise would be a disservice to anyone listening who has ever tried to build something real while running out of energy to build it with. The scholarship covered tuition and housing and a portion of my living expenses. The portion it did not cover I made up through work, 3 jobs across those 4 years, sometimes overlapping in ways that required careful scheduling and the kind of discipline that does not feel like discipline from the inside because it has no alternative. I worked mornings at a campus coffee shop that opened at 5:30. I tutored undergraduate students in the evenings 3 nights a week. On weekends I worked at a small law office downtown doing filing, research, and whatever administrative work the partners needed handled, which turned out to be one of the most valuable decisions I ever made without fully understanding its value at the time. I maintained the grade point average the scholarship required. Not barely, not by the minimum necessary, but consistently and by a margin that reflected genuine engagement with the work rather than strategic performance for the sake of a requirement. I was not studying to keep a scholarship. I was studying because the law was the thing I had chosen, and choosing something fully is different from doing it adequately. I graduated with honors. I was accepted to 4 law schools. The one I chose offered a full scholarship of its own, the kind awarded to a small number of incoming students based on academic record and the promise demonstrated in the application materials. It covered tuition and housing and enough of my remaining expenses that I needed only 2 jobs during those 3 years instead of 3, which felt, at the time, like an almost luxurious reduction in the daily weight of everything I was carrying. Law school was 3 years of the most demanding and most clarifying work I have ever done. I understood, somewhere in the middle of the first year, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, not in the easy comfortable sense but in the deeper sense of a person who has found the thing that asks everything of them and is willing to give it. I made law review. I competed in moot court. I clerked for a federal judge during my second summer, an experience that shaped how I understand the relationship between law and the people it is meant to serve in ways I am still drawing on today. I graduated in the top 3% of my class. I received an offer from the firm where I work now before I had passed the bar exam, which is not a common sequence of events but which reflected, I was told, the particular impression I had made during my clerkship on people whose opinions the firm valued. I passed the bar on my first attempt. During all of this my father called occasionally. Birthdays. Holidays. The kind of contact that maintains the shape of a relationship without filling in its substance. He asked how things were going in the general way that people ask when they want reassurance that things are going well rather than actual information about how things are going. I told him things were going well because they were, in the ways that mattered, and because the detailed version of how they were going was not something I was interested in sharing with him. Dana and Patrick got married that September after my sophomore year of college. I attended the wedding. I wore a dress I had bought secondhand and altered myself. The venue was exactly as expensive as it had looked in the brochures spread across our kitchen table. The flowers alone cost more than my monthly living stipend. I smiled in the photographs and I danced at the reception and I drove home the next morning and went to work my Sunday shift at the coffee shop because I had a mortgage payment due and the wedding had cost me a day's wages and travel expenses I had not fully accounted for. I did not think about it as unfair anymore by then. I had stopped carrying the unfairness as something active a long time before that wedding. What I had done instead was put it somewhere quiet and factual inside myself, the way you note a truth about a person without needing to repeat it constantly, because the truth does not change and repeating it only exhausts you. 8 years after the wedding, 10 years after the kitchen table, my father called me on a Tuesday evening in the spring. I could tell from the first word he said that this was not a birthday call or a holiday call. This was a different kind of call entirely. His voice had a texture I had not heard from him in a long time, something stripped of its usual easy confidence, something that sounded, underneath everything, like a man who had run out of other options before he picked up the phone. He told me Dana and Patrick were divorcing. He told me it had become complicated, legally, and that Dana needed a lawyer, a good one, and that the retainer fees for the kind of representation she needed were significant. He paused after that, the way people pause when they have said the setup and are waiting to see if the other person will complete the sentence so they do not have to say the actual request out loud. I let the pause sit there for a long time. Then I asked him what he was calling to ask me. My father took a long time to say it directly. That was not surprising. My father had spent most of his life being a man who could talk around the center of a difficult thing for a very long time before arriving at it, and he had always been particularly skilled at this when the difficult thing involved asking for something he understood, on some level, he did not have the right to ask for. He mentioned Dana first, the way she was doing, how hard the separation had been on her emotionally, how Patrick had turned out to be someone different from who they had all believed him to be, how the legal situation had become complicated in ways that required serious professional help. He talked about Patrick's lawyer, how aggressive the representation had been, how Dana was at a disadvantage without someone equally skilled on her side. He talked for almost 8 minutes before he said my name in the particular way that signals what comes next. He said he knew I had done well. He said he was proud of everything I had built, the career, the partnership, all of it. He said he had always known I was going to be something, even when things had been difficult, even when the circumstances had not been what any of them would have chosen. Then he said he was wondering whether I might be in a position to help with Dana's legal fees. Not all of them, he said quickly, as though the partial nature of the request made it more reasonable. Just the retainer, to start. Just enough to get her proper representation. He said it the way he had said redirected 10 years earlier at a kitchen table, with careful word choice designed to make the thing sound like less than it was. I sat with the phone against my ear and I looked at the wall of my apartment, the one where I had hung my law school diploma the week after it arrived, not out of vanity but because I had wanted it somewhere I could see it from the place where I worked in the evenings, a reminder of what the work had been for. I told my father I would think about it. He thanked me. His voice loosened slightly with relief, the way it does when a person mistakes a pause for a yes. I said goodnight and I ended the call and I sat in my apartment for a long time in the particular silence that follows a conversation you have been, in some form, preparing for without knowing it for 10 years. I thought about the kitchen table. I thought about the word redirected. I thought about 3 weeks of scholarship searches and 5:30 morning shifts and second-hand dresses altered by hand and a Sunday coffee shop shift the morning after my sister's expensive wedding. I thought about my grandparents, who had contributed to a fund for 12 years and never been told what had happened to it. I thought about what my father had said on the phone that evening, the 8 minutes of careful framing before the actual request, the pride that arrived conveniently in the same sentence as the ask. And then I thought about what I actually wanted to do, not what would feel satisfying in a hot immediate sense, not what would wound most precisely, but what was true and what I could stand behind completely and what would communicate, without drama and without a long painful conversation I did not have the energy for, exactly what needed to be said. I knew what I was going to do by the time I went to bed that night. The envelope. I went to my bank the next morning before work. I withdrew a single dollar bill from my account, crisp and unfolded, the kind a teller produces when you make a specific request for a specific denomination in good condition. I put it in a plain white envelope. I wrote my father's address on the front in my own handwriting, clearly and carefully. Inside the envelope, alongside the dollar bill, I placed a single index card. On the index card I had written, in the same clear careful handwriting, one sentence. It said, "This is what you redirected my future into." I turned it into everything else myself. I sealed the envelope. I put a stamp on it. I mailed it on my way to the office. I did not call him afterward to explain it. I did not send a follow-up message. I did not reach out to Dana or to any other member of my family to provide context or prepare anyone for what was coming. The envelope was the complete statement and I had said everything I intended to say inside it. He received it 3 days later. I know this because the call started on a Thursday evening, which aligned with the delivery window I had calculated when I mailed it. The first call I let go to voicemail. The second. The third. He did not leave a message on any of them, which told me he had not prepared what he wanted to say and was hoping the live version of me would be easier to reach than whatever he had encountered in that envelope. Dana called the following morning. I let that go to voicemail as well. She left a message that was long and emotional and said several things that were probably true about her own pain and several things that were probably not entirely fair about mine. I listened to it once and then I did not listen to it again. My grandparents called that Saturday. That call I answered. My grandfather asked me if I was all right. Not whether I had done the right thing, not whether I had considered how my father felt, not whether I was planning to reconsider. Simply whether I was all right. I told him I was, more all right than I had been in a long time actually, and he said good, in the quiet way he said most important things, and then he asked if I wanted to tell him what had happened and I told him everything, all of it, the phone call and the request and the envelope and the dollar bill and the index card. When I finished he was quiet for a moment. Then he told me that he and my grandmother had never been told what happened to the college fund. He said they had assumed it had simply been used for my education the way it was intended, because nobody had told them otherwise, and that he was sorry, more sorry than he knew how to say properly, that he had not asked more directly at the time. I told him it was not his fault. I told him he had given me something that could not be redirected, which was the belief, from the time I was very young, that what I did with my mind and my effort mattered. I told him that belief had been worth more than the money ever would have been, not because the money had not been important, it had been, but because the belief had followed me into every room the money could not reach. He cried a little. So did I, quietly, the way I do most things. The final call. My father called one more time, 10 days after the envelope arrived, on a Sunday morning when I was at home with coffee and the particular stillness of a weekend that belongs entirely to yourself. I answered. I answered because I had decided, sometime in the 10 days between the envelope and that Sunday morning, that I wanted one real conversation with him, not to give him the opportunity to explain himself or to seek the apology I had stopped expecting years ago, but because I had things I wanted to say out loud to him directly, and I had earned the right to say them, and I was done waiting for a moment that felt right when the honest truth was that no moment was going to feel right and I was simply going to have to make one. He started to speak. I asked him to let me go first. I told him that I did not send the envelope to hurt him. I told him I sent it because 10 years ago he had made a decision about my life without asking me, and the decision had cost me something real, and I had spent a decade handling the cost of it entirely alone without ever once asking him to acknowledge it. I told him I was not going to ask for Dana's legal fees. I was not going to ask for repayment of the original fund. I was not going to ask for anything at all, because asking him for things had never produced anything except disappointment, and I was no longer interested in that particular cycle. I told him I loved him in the complicated way that you love a parent when the love is real and the relationship is genuinely broken, and both of those things are true at the same time without canceling each other out. I told him I wished Dana well with the divorce, sincerely, because whatever had happened between us had nothing to do with her marriage, and I was not interested in letting one thing contaminate another. And then I told him that I was going to hang up now, and that I hoped he was well, and that I would be in touch when I was ready, which might be a long time from now or might be sooner, and that the timeline was going to be mine to decide. He said my name once more before I ended the call. Just my name, nothing attached to it, the way you say a word when you have run out of everything else and the word is the only thing left that still means what you need it to mean. I hung up gently. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction exactly, though something in the neighborhood of satisfaction was present. With the particular quiet that arrives when you have finally said the true thing to the person who needed to hear it and you are no longer carrying it alone. I made a second cup of coffee. I sat by my window. My firm's quarterly report was sitting on my desk, the one that showed the numbers from the past 3 months, the billing hours and the client outcomes and the partner contributions, my name listed among them the way it had been listed for 2 years now, earned through work that nobody had funded for me and nobody could redirect away from me. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and I started working. Because that is what I have always done. And nobody has ever been able to take that from me. If your family ever spent what was yours and called it love, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next one. This is Hidden Blood Revenge, where the quiet ones finally tell their side.